I'm definitely not like 2016, 2017, 2018 when I was like, all I want to do is real estate. Now I'm like, well, I love real estate, but it's not all I want to do. So that's a big part of why I want this manageable portfolio so that I can also focus on my life, right? And I want
Welcome to the Golden Nuggets of Real Estate Investing, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve financial freedom through real estate. We'll be discussing the most important lessons, or better known as the Golden Nuggets of Real Estate Investing, entrepreneurship, and personal finance with new and experienced investors to help you get into real estate investing or scale up your portfolio. So make sure to tune in. What's going on, everyone? It's Ross Nedaee. I'm a real estate agent, an investor, and host of the Real Estate Golden Nuggets podcast. I have an amazing episode full of golden nuggets for you. If you like this podcast and have gotten any value out of it, please share this far and wide to reach as many people as possible. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave me a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you can stay up to date on the most recent episodes. Thank you so much for your support. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Real Estate Golden Nuggets. I'm very excited to have my special guest here, Kellan James. If you haven't heard his name around, I'm sure you will. He is an amazing entrepreneur. I'm very excited to have him on board because not many people can have a big portfolio where it's solely owned by themselves. And Kellan has just done that. So without further ado, Kellan, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit back about your journey?
I appreciate the kind words, Ross. So my background basically is I went to school for computer science up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario in Canada. And I did 4-year computer science degree. And once I did that, I moved down to London, Ontario in, I think it was 2012. And I basically just worked my tech job for a while, right? Just kind of saving. My plan was, I realized after, I always tell the story because I sat in that chair and for the first week or so, my back hurt. And I was like, this is nice. And then the pain just kind of went away. And I was like, I don't think this is the kind of thing I want my body to get used to, is just sitting in a chair this often. So I don't know. I just remember that. And then I remember after maybe a year or two of it, I think like a lot of millennials, they kind of lose patience with it. And they're like, I don't know that I want to do this for another 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I pretty quickly realized, I found out the idea of financial independence, and I looked up, there was a Mr. Money Mustache, a blogger that talks about financial independence and living frugally and stuff like that. And then, the financial independence subreddit and things like that. So, I really got into the idea of financial independence, and my initial intention was actually to just save up using index funds, right? So, if you save up $1 million, you can safely withdraw 4% of that per year and live off that indefinitely, right? Without ever touching the principal. So 40 grand a year, maybe that was enough for me. I don't know. And that was kind of my initial thought process. Right. And then I was like, well, do I ever buy a house? Like, what's the plan there? So I started I was looking at houses, and I was like, well, if I got a house, I'd have to buy a car, because I actually sold my car because I was walking to work all these years, just trying to save money. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if I had to buy a car, then, I don't really know that there's a good reason to buy a house, and, it ends up costing me more per month. And then I was like, well, what if I bought a duplex? And then I kind of started seeing that world. I heard about Bigger Pockets, I think somewhere online. And then I started binging Bigger Pockets podcasts. And then in one of the podcast episodes, they mentioned the idea that, you can set an alert for your local town. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll set an alert for London, Ontario. And I did. And then maybe a couple months later, someone posted, they're like, is anyone else in London, Ontario buying real estate? And there was no community here at that time at all. And so, or basically there was very little there was like the old boys club, and that was about it. And so we ended up getting this small get together through Bigger Pockets. And, Matt McKeever was there, Dylan McLaughlin, some other good friends of mine now, and Jeff Weibo, and we ended up, Mike Rosart came out a few months later, and it was this really interesting spark that we knew something might be happening here. At the time, we all of us were working our full-time jobs. And, I had no real estate at the time. Some other people did have a couple properties or a few properties, but nothing crazy. And, I get really inspired by the idea that people in my local town could be doing this stuff. So I had zero properties, and I decided, after talking with a bunch of local investors, the one thing I always heard was, I wish I had bought more, and I wish I hadn't sold. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna buy and hold, and I'm gonna not, and I'm gonna do it on my own without partners, because it just seemed like a nice way to go for me. And I'm gonna do it as quickly as possible. I'm gonna buy as much as I can as quickly as I can, but make sure they're good deals.
Right.
And so I bought my first duplex. I did 5% down on it. House hacked, live in one side, rent out the other. I was living for free. And then I got the next property with 20% down, and that ended up being one of my best burrs that I've done, at least in a 3 or 4 month period. Was the second property, and yeah, and then I bought my third property, which actually I live in to this day. It's a triplex that I still house hack. And I scaled up, and I was buying everything I was buying. I was trying to make sure I was getting money out of every deal. So, so yeah, I ended up scaling up to 10 properties, 32 units. And that's when I quit my day job. And I've scaled up since to 50 something units at this point. I'm throughout this whole time, never sold a property. I was always just holding, because I really liked that advice, and I could see the value in it. And then of course, we ended up seeing in 2020 this insane appreciation. And so I'm very glad that I held on throughout those years, because I know a lot of people who are kind of getting sick of the game or sick of the landlording, and they're like selling, oh, I made my profit, and they sold. And I'm really glad that I held throughout that process. I had 14 buildings that were all able to see that appreciation in 2020. So made a big, and since as well. So yeah, right now sitting around 50 something units, trying to focus more now on 6 plus unit buildings. So now I've, like 4 6plexes, an 8plex, a 5plex, and some triplexes is kind of where I'm at. Right. And yeah, still all solely owned. And a big goal of mine right now is to pick up an apartment building solo without any partners. So that's a big part of the reason why recently I did decide actually to sell some properties for the first time ever. And I sold off 3 properties, and I'm actually looking to sell off a couple more as well. Just trying to build up a nice big war chest ready to pick up an apartment building. And it's my way also of kind of offloading some of the smaller buildings, so that I can then focus my attention on larger ones.
Wow, that's incredible. And you did all this by yourself, which is the biggest hurdle that we come across in finance. So you told us that you quit your job. Then how are you able to finance all these buildings and continue building that portfolio? Because that's very, very unique.
It was a journey, because I didn't know a lot of people that had really attempted that. Everyone I know who had quit their job, it seemed like they were doing joint venture partnerships, a lot of stuff with other people, like OPM, and like a lot of private loans and things like that. And I don't know, I really like to try and keep things simple. So my first 10 properties, I essentially all of them, I mean, 8 out of 10 of them I did with Scotiabank. So Scotiabank will let you do up to 10 properties if you do it through them directly. If you go through a mortgage broker, you might be limited to 4 to 6. And then you have to start working with the bank directly. But so I got up to the 10 properties. That was when I decided I'm going to quit. And of course, now if you approach a bank with no job and 10 mortgages, they're going to say, well, we're not giving you mortgages. Right. So then I went on the hunt, and I talked to half a dozen mortgage brokers at least, and a bunch of different, direct lenders, like commercial lenders, credit unions, things like that. Probably upwards of 10 different lenders I talked to. And I came across a local credit union that I found was going to work really well for me. Actually, my mortgage broker referred me to them because she didn't work with them. So she referred me directly to them. And now I work directly with a local credit union. So, I'm not able to do 20% down anymore. It's 25%. And that's just the nature of the game. If I want to go in myself, I got to put bigger down payments now. And, the amortization is 25 year. You can't get 30 anymore. So missing out on that a little bit. But at the end of the day, I don't have any limit on the number of doors I can buy. And I'm still able to burr properties, and I'm able to get approval solo. So I'm super happy with that. It's a lot less on my mind to not have partnerships to maintain, and relationships, and people to answer to, and people that justify why there's a vacancy right now, or why the renovation costs as much as it did, or why am I working on this project and not this project? Well, I only have myself to answer to on that. So I really prefer that approach.
Yeah, no, for sure. So talk me through, how does the credit union aspect work in terms of, you mentioned 25 is the down there, right? But then when you're doing these burr projects, right? So do they initially give you the capital to purchase the property, and then you just do a refinance just like a normal bank would, or how does that work?
So any of the money that I have, it's the same as any other bank. You have to bring the down payment funds, and
Yep.
then you buy the property, and then you finance the renovations yourself as well. You can do that through unsecured lines of credit. If you need that renovation money, unsecured lines of credit, borrowing money from people, maybe it's on a promissory note,
Right.
or other refis and that kind of thing. Like all of the money, most like throughout my journey, I've really tried to keep it simple in that the money I'm borrowing is pretty much just mortgage money, either mortgages or unsecured lines of credit, or the occasional promissory note funds from friends, family. For me, in my case, it's just fellow investors. So my friends
Right.
are investors, so it's perfect. Yeah, never borrowing. At this point, I think to this day, still the most I'd ever borrowed any moment from an individual was like 160 grand. So nothing crazy. I know plenty of people who borrow millions, and that's how they're
Yeah.
buying the real estate.
Mhm.
But I prefer to just maybe borrow some money to help me get the down payment funds, buy the property, refi it, and pay them back. I really try not to hold too much money at that, 8, 10, 12% plus interest. I don't really hold much of that at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, just trying to keep that as simple as I can. And one of the best ways to do that is to buy good deals, right? If the deals are solid, you're able to refi, you're able to pay off all those loans. And there's no point, in my opinion, I don't see a ton of value in hanging on to too much debt at that high of an interest rate for any length of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So two things pop up when you mentioned that. One is, how are you sourcing out the deals? Are they on market, off market? Yes, because the spread has to be really good for you to refi. And then
Yeah.
secondly, of course, with credit unions, you're looking at a higher interest rate. So how much are you typically looking at?
Yeah, so I think my interest rates have been somewhere between 2.5 to 3.1%. And if these are Canadians, that's probably relatively reasonable rates that people are hearing. I know in the States, the rates tend to be a little bit higher, but they get to
Right.
hold on to it for 25, 30 years straight, whereas we get 5-year terms. But yeah, so a little bit higher, right now, like for comparison, if you're listening to this in the future, people are getting 1.5 to high ones kind of interest rates at like Scotia and stuff like that. So a
Yeah.
little bit higher, but totally reasonable at the same time. So what was the other?
And then how do you source deals?
Yeah, so I think at this point, most of my portfolio, I think 80% plus of my portfolio has been off-market deals. I do have some in the past where I bought things on the market. I think the last on-market deal I bought was probably not since 2019 or so, though.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm definitely sourcing most of my stuff off market, and I'm doing it myself as well. I mean, you could definitely, I think it's worth getting on wholesalers lists. There's value in it. Maybe occasionally they'll come across a deal. Right now, it seems like wholesalers are just another version of the MLS, though, right? It's or best offers, so everyone's coming and doing bidding
Yeah.
wars. It's just a smaller market, so maybe you have a little better chance than on market. But once again, as always, I try to do that stuff just myself. So just act like a wholesaler would, right? You don't necessarily have to do a whole flyer campaign, although don't let that be something that seems intimidating. In
Yeah.
Canada, you reach out to Canada Post, you give them some flyers, they mail them out for you. And you can do that by postal code, or you can blanket a whole city if it's a small town. It's not that big a deal. And that's where most of their deals are coming from, right? So if you want to
Right.
just do what a wholesaler does to find your own deals, send out some flyers, get a second phone if you want, and dedicate it to answering those calls. But what I tend to do is a lot more networking amongst people in my neighborhood or in the neighborhoods that I target. Talking with contractors, talking with property managers and realtors for pocket listings. But most of the time, it's not going to be realtor related. It's actually just going to be deals I find on my own. So yeah, there's not like a silver bullet. There's just a ton of different strategies, and I try to do all of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually did a video on my YouTube channel. I haven't posted a video on my YouTube channel in like a year, but I did a video on how I find off market deals, and I went through like probably 15 different methods and how I do that. Door knocking, of course, driving for dollars, any way you can get in touch with the owners. So like in London, Ontario, we have this quirky method where you can go into City Hall and you can go on this computer, and this computer will tell you what the mailing address of the owner is. So you can do things like that. I mean, you can't so much during COVID, but there are workarounds.
Yeah.
But any way you can get in touch with the owners directly, right? Even if you can find their name, maybe you have a friend who's a realtor, they can find the name of the owner. You can try and find them on Facebook. Just you're kind of a PI, right? You're just trying to find these people, reach out to them, get in touch with them any way you can, and just ask if they're willing to sell, and make sure if you're not a realtor, to clarify you're not a realtor, because a lot of people really get their backs against the wall, right? For
Correct.
better or for worse. That's one advantage you do have as just or just as an investor, is to say, I'm not a realtor. And people go, okay, because they think that realtors are going to take advantage of them by default, right? They know more than me. Even though as an investor, you could very well know more than them too.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
so
Actually,
it's,
the other way around, I would say.
yeah, sometimes it is. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome, awesome. So in terms of on your day to day, like how are you sourcing out or creating active income for yourself? Because I know you were doing a lot of buy and holds, right? So what are you doing? Are you wholesaling these deals yourself, like the ones that you don't want anymore, or how are you going about raising active income?
not a ton of active income, honestly. My focus has always just been, burring, and then for cash flow. I mean, my portfolio, I sold a couple recently, but my portfolio at some point recently was cash flowing 17,000 a month total, and that was like
Wow.
after vacancy and maintenance, and then there's probably close to another 10 grand or so of mortgage pay down, that or something like that, maybe 5 to 8 or something like that. So like
Right.
that's enough, more than enough for me to live on. I live a pretty frugal life. And then when you do a refinance, you have a chunk of cash sitting in the bank too. You got to make sure you're dealing with that tax side correctly. But at the end of the day, you have a bunch of capital, you can kind of live off there. I did start a coaching business. So, I've been doing that as active income for the last while. So that was one version of it, but for the most part, it's just been through cash flow and refinances, and I'm actually very comfortable with that. I know a lot of people are really, I need to see X amount per month, I need to see money come in before I can spend money. But if you've got a chunk of cash saved up and you have the skills and ability to earn more money, it's good to get comfortable with that, and with the idea that you're not always going to earn this much per month and then spend this much per month. It's going to be sporadic as an
Right.
entrepreneur. So, people need to get comfortable with that concept before they're going to be willing to quit their jobs, right? If they want to quit their job and pursue real estate full time, you may need to understand that it's not always going to be this steady flow of income,
That's right.
and just get comfortable with that roller coaster nature of this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then in terms of other active side, I know a lot of investors are kind of working on the private lending. Is that something you also take part?
So I think that it's really hot right now. I know a lot of people have, they've made their money in real estate. A lot of people, for the most part, they rode the appreciation wave. Now they're like, oh, I can just sell stuff off, lend it out at 10, 12%,
Right.
and live off the income. I think that like a portion of your money, that could be a really good thing. I think a lot of people go really far down that rabbit hole, and I don't think people really understand the risk they're taking on, especially when they're doing it unsecured. I think that for small amounts of money, it can be a really good thing. I'm doing it currently. I'm on both sides of it. I'm loaning out money. Sometimes I borrow money. But I never tried, I try not to do it with any huge amount of money. I definitely would prefer, even just an index fund over the long run earns an average, over the last 90 years has earned 9.5% interest. And that's definitely going to be far safer, in my opinion, than, at least historically, than private loans. I think that a lot of people tend to think, when you're in a hot market, they think this kind of thing lasts forever. You just want to be aware that whoever you're loaning money to, they need to understand how to pay you back. And
Yeah.
it's not the easiest thing to do, right? If their BRRRR project doesn't work out, how are they paying you back? And if the answer is they're borrowing money from someone else, well, that's kind of got a pyramid feel to it, right? So it's really
Yeah.
important that you're loaning money to people who know how to make far more than the 10% you're getting from them, so that they're ready to pay you back.
Yeah.
And ideally, their strategy is something that would work even if there was a market downturn or a correction or anything like that. So I don't do a ton of private lending. It's not really my jam. I'd kind of prefer to buy and hold real estate for the long term. So
Mhm.
instead, my approach is more going to be, buying apartment buildings and holding them for the long run. I feel quite a bit safer actually doing that. And even if it doesn't, like, again, generate that exact monthly income that a lot of people want, I know in the long run it's going to earn a lot more. So I prefer that method, and it feels safer to me as well.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned a couple of times. Yeah, the it's a mindset shift, right?
Yeah,
Folks that are used to working a corporate job, they're so used to a steady paycheck,
yeah.
right, or a steady income for the year, right? So
Hmm.
they kind of budget around that, and their expenses are I should say needs and wants are in there, right?
Yes.
Versus when I was an entrepreneur, you definitely have to figure out what is the must have and then try
Yeah.
to live off that. I've had a couple of folks who,
Yeah, I had a whole like long before well, I quit a few years back doing this, but I used to track all of that stuff. I mean, I didn't even track it so much as I just said, how much do I think I need for food and my cell
right,
phone and my internet and my living and whatever. And yeah, you can realize that, at a very like baseline level to get you by, you really don't need that much. And then, it does get to a point where if you're doing well in the real estate world or in your investing world or whatever entrepreneurship you're doing, you know, if you do end up making far more than you're spending, there's nothing wrong with increasing, your lifestyle. That's
right.
totally fine. I know that like for me, I totally did. I did almost a 180. Like I was very frugal and I still am. I live in a triplex. I still drive a Hyundai Accent. Like
Right.
I'm not, not doing anything crazy, but I love to spend money on convenience. Anything that saves me time is my favorite thing, to spend money on. So, if you don't have a cleaner, almost no matter who you are, it's worth getting a cleaner. They're like $100 or 100, maybe $150, maybe a month. I just do it once per month. They come to clean your house. You don't have to, it's another chore you don't have to think about.
Right.
And even if it's not you necessarily replacing that time with earning more money, it's replacing that time with time that you can relax in a clean, comfortable house, right? And then
That's
you
right.
can reapproach your work more, not as exhausted from spending the last 4 hours cleaning your house, right? And like
Absolutely.
I'm loving Instacart recently for grocery delivery. Anything I can outsource in the real estate world, I try to do. Uh, I'm still self-managing, but I think that I've realized recently a big part of why I still self-manage is because the type of properties that I have.
Mhm.
A lot of triplexes, even my sixplexes, a lot of them are converted dwellings,
Right.
so they're a little bit quirkier to manage, right? Plumbing's in weird places, and there's sound transfer in certain ones, and things like that. So a big part of my focus is now actually going to be shifting my portfolio to be something that's more manageable, easier to manage, and that way it's something I'm better able to outsource and feel confident in whoever I hire. Because of course, at any moment I could say, yeah, I have property management and hire a management company, but I
Right.
want to make sure my portfolio is being managed the way I want it to be. And I honestly, it's very rare. I'm not going to say I haven't met a good property manager, but very rare to find good property managers. So I prefer the idea of insourcing, hiring my own, like hiring a person, training them on how to do what I do, and then paying them a salary instead of paying them a percentage of gross rents. So that's going to be my intention in the long run. Get a portfolio that's more manageable and then start hiring that stuff out. So that's a big part of why I'm selling off some duplexes and things like that, and building up capital ready to purchase stuff that's more purpose built.
Yeah. And then your portfolio, does it all reside in London or where are you investing right now?
Yeah, 100% in London, Ontario. I really try and focus and try and keep things simple. So I'm 100% in London, Ontario. I'm actually now 100% in two neighborhoods, Oldies Village and Soho. So I had one downtown I sold, and that was the only outlier I had. Now I'm focused in those two neighborhoods. And fingers crossed, I keep something similar like that going. Or same idea, the core of downtown is really a goal of mine. Now, of course, if I'm looking more into apartment buildings, if there's something in London or even if it's in the surrounding area, then I'll be open to it because, apartment buildings are a completely different game in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. So what changed? I mean, why shift from say residential, the duplexes, the triplexes now into apartment buildings, right? You're looking
Yeah.
at bigger units. Are you more after the economies of a scale or what changed for you?
I mean, a big part of it is initially the goal was cash flow, right? I want X amount per month so I can feel comfortable quitting my job. And then the
Right.
goal after that was, well, I may as well build more cash flow. I have some good momentum. Why not keep going? And then it was like, okay, I don't need this much cash flow. I don't need more cash flow. I'd rather have more of an equity play, right? My goal is
Mhm.
now instead net worth gain. So, and of course, this is just the money side of life, right? There's also the life side of life. So I'll talk about that in a second. But on the money side, yeah, it's not so much about cash flow anymore. It's actually about adding value to buildings. And apartment buildings, for the most part, a big like the biggest part of that is actually just turnover. Whether you're doing cash for keys and paying people to leave, or just natural turnover over time. Which actually I do a ton of that as well. A lot of my stuff, I bought like in 2020, I bought somewhere around 20 units, and now there's just occasionally some, oh, hey, I'm going to move. So I have like 4 or 5 units under renovation right now.
Right.
that just natural turnover, right? So you don't necessarily need to, force people. Not you can't. We can't force anyone anyway, but you don't necessarily have to force it by paying a bunch of people immediately. Sometimes natural turnover works. But yeah, it's because I'm trying to add value, and a lot of that is through turnover on apartment buildings. Just like, I am trying to structure this as something that I can do for the long run, right? I don't want to be running ragged. I don't want to be, like grinding constantly. So,
Yeah.
I had a lot of years of that. I had a ton of energy. I've noticed that energy starting to wane a little bit. Like, I'm definitely not like 2016, 2017, 2018, when I was like, all I want to do is real estate. Now I'm like, well, I love real estate, but it's not all I want to do. So that's a big part of why I want this manageable portfolio, so that I can also focus on my life, right?
So when you are looking at these apartment buildings, is there a portion of it that will still, of course, there'll still be cash flow, but you're saying it's not as liquid or in terms of cash flow as, say,
Yeah.
the smaller multis. However, the equity gain is a lot bigger. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So honestly, I'll probably just, like, in terms of like month to month living type stuff,
Mhm.
it's probably going to be mostly from my existing cash flow on my current portfolio, and that in a
Right.
combination of refinances and things like that. And then yeah, and then the rest is just going to be
So for somebody who's starting out, right, somebody who's just wants is focused solely on cash flow, based on your experience, is this still a good idea to focus on those smaller units and then
absolutely.
transition to apartments?
I do think that. I don't think that I honestly don't think it's a good idea for most people to jump into apartments. It's not because you don't have the ability to or anything like that. There definitely is value in learning from the smaller ones before moving on to the big ones. That's for
Right.
sure. The 3, 4, 5, 6 unit buildings, they just tend to cash flow a lot better, especially, converted dwellings. They tend to cash flow fantastic.
Um,
Yeah.
and I love that you brought that up there, Kellan, in regards to there's always a fine battle between, being an investor or having a career, and then you have your personal life. And
Yeah.
I'm sure, since you're managing a ton of units, how difficult is that in terms of management? I mean, it's not every day that you get a call, but I can imagine with, like, 56 units or so, there's a
Yeah.
lot of, hands-on involvement on your end.
Yeah, so I don't do any of those. I do my best to batch that, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't necessarily answer everyone immediately. I kind of batch it, reply to a bunch of people. But essentially, most problems these days are, a tenant texts you, maybe they send you a photo of an issue, you text your contractor goes out and fixes it, sends you a text saying with a photo of the fix, and then you send them an e-transfer saying it's completed, right? So all of
Yeah.
this stuff is done remotely, even though I live locally. And then there is some stuff I still do in person. When a unit turns over, I like to go in and look at it myself and make sure that, oh, fix these things. And then I get my contractor to go fix them. But
Right.
for the most part, yeah, it's not like the maintenance side of things is really manageable.
Yeah.
It's more so new acquisitions and renovations. Those are the things that really take 90% of your time. If I were to just stop buying and just maintain, it's very easy. At the same time, even then, I would like to have someone helping out with it, because I travel. If I'm traveling, I don't necessarily want to be getting texts from tenants. It definitely throws, it's kind of a wet blanket on your situation. If you're like in Paris having a nice coffee and you get a text from a tenant, it's like, oh man, you don't want to think about work all the time, right? You like
That's right.
That's the thing. If you're self-managing, you work all the time. Like, you don't get a day off. So it's good to be able to hand that stuff off. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in self-managing in the early days, and then at some point later on, passing the torch, or at least getting someone to help you out with it.
For sure, for sure. One of the hurdles that I find personally for me to get over this hump is the tenant profile, being
Yeah.
able to select your own tenants, and I personally think that's probably the most important part, other than finding the right deal, right?
Yes.
Because if you don't have the right tenant profile, then you're dealing with a lot of headaches in the future. Versus if you're dealing with great tenants, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, then they understand the procedures and processes, whether it's an email or text to say, hey, let me know if anything's broken down, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, tenant screening is like is a huge part of it. If you put quality tenants in there, if you have a triplex and it's filled with 3 quality tenants, you'll very rarely hear from that about that triplex. That triplex won't be a stress point in your life. But if you put a shitty tenant in there, it's going to be a pain point. So be patient. I mean,
Yeah.
people have heard this 1,000 times, but like, take vacancy instead of filling it with someone. That and you've heard this 1,000 times too, but I've made the same mistake myself. You know, you get these red flags. You're like, oh, I don't know if I should rent to this person, and then you do, and then of course those things turn out to be true. So listen to your gut with this stuff. Lose the $1,000 or whatever it is for that unit for that month, and wait until the next month, because when you find someone good, that's who you want. You know, and if you don't have good people applying, just wait. It's not worth it. It's not
Yeah,
worth it at all.
absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, you want to save yourself the headache. So,
Yeah.
in terms of you managing itself, so these businesses that you have, or I should say, these properties that you have, are they all on their personal name, or they incorporated? How are you dealing with on the tax side? Let's talk a little about that.
Yeah, so actually everything I own right now is still personally owned. I did start a three-tiered corporation or three-tiered corporate structure recently. So a real estate company, a property management company, and a holding.
Right.
On the tax side of things, you really have to plan that with your accountant. It's very specific, very important for you to just speak with your accountant about that stuff. Really specific to your situation and really specific to your plans as well. But what I like to, I mean, I like to show people that you definitely don't have to at an early time, at an early point in your journey, incorporate. There's there may be some negligible benefits to it. There may be some downsides to it. So you kind of got to look at the full picture and make a decision. It was a difficult one for me to make. It was a difficult decision, and I'm even still at this point not necessarily sure which properties I want to buy personally or in the corps and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very specific to your situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, not many people understand this, but basically, when you get rental income, like you said, in a corporation, it's taxed higher than it would be on a personal side.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
like you said, it's considered passive income, and in Canada, passive income is taxed almost like capital gains at 50%, which is huge.
Yeah,
Right?
it's and well, yeah, it's yeah, like one of the reasons some people do incorporate is because they run into roadblocks on the financing side, right? So there are plenty of lenders that won't lend to you unless it's a corporation. So, you know,
Mhm.
luckily I've worked with lenders that are still somewhat comfortable with it. Although even the lender I'm working with is like, we definitely prefer if it was incorporated. So and the reason, and honestly, the only reason, from my understanding, is because they get a financial statement from a corporation at the end of the year. It's easier for them to audit. It's easier for them to analyze and do their underwriting on.
Right.
But you can actually pay your accountant to do a financial statement for you personally, and it's the same thing. You got to talk to your lawyer, your accountant, fellow investors. If you have a mentor, just like talk through all these situations.
Are you holding any of these portfolios in a trust account, or how are you managing that aspect of it?
No, yeah, they're, like I said, all personally owned. And you know, I do mess, like if you're talking about like Olympia Trust and that kind of stuff. Like I don't have any loans. Like nothing I own right now is through borrowing money from other people's RSPs and stuff like that. That's another approach people can definitely consider. I'm actually more on the other side of it. I am loaning out through my TFSA. I really want to bump up my contribution room on my TFSA because I essentially ignored my TFSA for like years while I was buying real estate, and I really don't want to ignore it. I think it's an awesome vehicle for tax savings. The way I'd like to keep it.
That's awesome. No, that's a very comfortable space to be in.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, for somebody who's been investing in the end, you have a ton of, essentially experience, right? Especially with BRRRR projects. How come you never considered, active side, like things like flipping, for instance, or wholesaling? Was that
Yeah.
something you're considering, or Airbnb? I know, because there's a lot you can do, right?
Yeah, a lot of what I teach people in general is to maintain focus, right? And you know, and like focus means avoiding distractions, and so there's a lot of shiny objects, and for me, the goal is always long term. It's really because I'm trying to maintain focus on where I really make the money, and where I really make the money is buying stuff under market value, forcing the appreciation, refinancing, and buying the next one. So I actually am in the process of a wholesale right now, so fingers crossed I make some money on that one. But it was just because it was kind of the perfect storm. I didn't have, well, I did have a lot on the go, but I just decided I wanted to take this one on. I had a situation where I had just sold a couple of properties, so I had a good amount of cash. I was able to buy this property in cash with no mortgage. Just my intention being buy it and sell it on the market. So I'm in the process of that right now. Really simple. Wholesales are awesome when you can just buy something under market and then pop it up on the market and sell it for more.
For sure.
I just sent a cleaner through is basically all I did. So got the junk out and sent a cleaner through. So hopefully I make some money on it. If not, it's if not, maybe I break even and move on, and that's fine. But yeah, it's not my focus at all.
Yeah, yeah. But the importance here is you have multiple exit strategies. Like you said, worst case, you're gonna hold on to it, and you know that
Yeah.
you're gonna make rental income out of it, so no
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely true.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love that. And then so in regards to the mindset, I want to talk about mindset here
Yeah.
because for somebody to go quit their job to scale that quickly and that efficiently, right?
Yeah.
How are you mentally preparing yourself for that? Because that's a huge shift. First of all, taking the leap of faith of quitting, a stable
Yeah.
income, and then secondly, growing at a pace that you're growing. How are you managing
Yeah.
to do that? Yeah,
I was not, I was really nervous about quitting, just because, it's you finally saying, what I've built here is actually enough to sustain my life going forward, right? I don't need to do what I've been doing for all these years anymore. And a big part of it for people, two things is their sense of personal identity. A big part of
hmm
it is generally tied up in their career and their job, right? When people ask what they do, I mean, when you talk to someone for the first time, they generally ask, what do you do? So, there's a lot of people that hold their pride in that, and that's a tough thing to get over, or move your identity into something else. But that's why I try to like to disperse my identity amongst a bunch of things, right? I'm not just Kellan the real estate investor. I'm Kellan a bunch of other things, right?
yeah,
Um, so it helps you to kind of like to get comfortable with what your personal identity is, and hopefully detach it from your career, right? So that's a big part of it. I think a lot of it is trying to do your due diligence before you take the leap, right? So I did having faith in yourself, having faith in your network, getting connected with the right people, and just
right.
like anything, rather than quitting your job and starting and doing a startup, it's better maybe to try the startup on the side and that kind of thing. So,
hmm
same idea with real estate. Build your portfolio as you're working, and then once you're getting a little more comfortable with it, you can kind of ease into it, and just be comfortable with the idea that you don't necessarily, need to you don't necessarily need to live that expensive lifestyle immediately, right? If you don't want that life, or ever if you don't want, and just be comfortable with the idea of maybe living a bit of a frugal lifestyle for a period of time until you're ready to, until you've built up even more cash flow or whatever you need to live the lifestyle you want. A big part of it was actually, what helped me to decide to quit was, having a plan for the coming chunk of time. So I don't usually make like a 5-year plan or anything like that, but I usually know 6, maybe 12 months plan. And
hmm
that helped me too, to kind of get over that idea of quitting. So we ended up leaving on a van trip, and this was in 2019, right before 2020 COVID, which was awesome. So we drove around the US in a van. We converted a Sprinter van, my girlfriend and I and our dog, and we traveled around. We did 30,000 kilometers around the USA. We saw
Wow.
all like 20 national parks and all like 30 something states, and yeah, like just had an amazing time. And all the while I was trying to manage stuff remotely. I did have someone locally trying to help me out, and it was
Yeah.
I kind of cowboyed it for sure. But it was like a good reminder that that's the kind of stuff. That's the reason I'm doing this stuff, right? Because I, one of the challenges I've had, and I think I've noticed a lot of people maybe have but don't recognize, is when they quit their job, they continue buying more real estate and doing that thing, and that could be a great thing. But I guarantee there's a chunk of those, or at least a subset of them, that there's probably there. It's similar to you finish your undergrad degree and now you go to your master's because.
Another thing I was going to ask you, have you considered crypto? Is that something that's on your radar?
Yeah, so I was actually really in that rabbit hole back when I was working my tech job, because a lot of tech guys are, in 20, geez, maybe, I don't know. Another one of those stories, right, where someone was into it at that time and they didn't hold. I didn't really hold very much of it, but I do have actually a relatively significant crypto holdings right now. But the only reason is because I know someone. I'm not going to get into detail, but I know someone who works in that field. I know them, I trust them, and they're actually managing this stuff for me. So I gave them a chunk of capital that they can kind of do their thing with, and I trust them to do it, and it's doing well. But what my favorite part about it is that it's not taking up any of my mental bandwidth, because that's another distraction, I'll tell you. And man, is
Oh,
it.
I love that you mentioned earlier as the shiny syndrome, right?
Yeah,
It's all over. It's very hard, I find, as an entrepreneur to stay focused because you see deals all over the place. Like you see
yeah,
one in this city, you see one in this city, and it's just like you just want to go. And I don't know how people do it personally, because there's folks that I know personally that are like investing all over the country. Some people across the board, even like in states.
yeah.
And to me, again, maybe it's a mindset thing for myself, and I just don't feel comfortable taking that huge leap of faith or going that far of a distance,
Right.
because as I'm progressing, my portfolio is not as significant as yours, but I do tend to be around the area just because I want to have
Yeah.
my feet on the ground, right? So I understand that if something goes wrong, not that necessarily that I'm going to fix it, but it just is more of
Yeah.
a, hey, can I delegate this to a certain person to take care of it? Whereas
Yeah.
buying completely unseen and like you're not handling anything and you're letting someone else manage it, you don't know what is really going on, I feel.
Yeah. There's an absolute advantage to being local or near, or be able to take a drive down for like a couple hour drive or something like that. There's an
Mhm.
absolutely an advantage there. It's not something like, yeah, there's a mindset thing to get over there if you want to invest somewhere remotely, but it's not something you have to do. Like if you're willing to take a 2 hour drive, there's almost definitely going to be a market that you can make a lot of money in, and you have a strategic advantage by being local. I mean, there is an advantage there. Now, if you want to invest in other cities, I'm not an expert at that because it's not what I do. But for sure, almost anyone I've talked to who does that stuff, they have someone that they know and trust in that city. They have a version of themselves, boots on the ground in that city, and even there, they're going to be like these. Even the investor that's remote, they're going to be flying down occasionally to check on things. You want to keep an eye on things yourself a bit. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not something you have to do.
Yeah.
But if there's a market that really intrigues you that's remote, I mean, the management side, the acquisition side, a lot of the stuff, even when I'm buying stuff in London, Ontario, I don't necessarily drive over to the property very often. So a lot of the stuff is very similar, whether you're investing locally or remotely. It's going to be different if you're crossing borders. Then there's another layer of abstraction there, more tax situations and stuff to deal with.
This, I mean, since you are, doing this for quite some time, what does a typical day in Kellan's life look like?
That's a good question. So some days, like I try, like Angie and I, sometimes I'll have like well, she's still working a full-time job, but if there's a day that she has off or something like that, I'll treat a Tuesday like I call it like treating it like a Sunday, right? So some days I'm just like, you know what, this is a Sunday to me. I'm just gonna have a lazy day and just relax. And I'm watching Better Call Saul right now, so I'm just like watch some TV and just enjoy my go for a walk, hang out with friends. Like that's actually one of my that's kind of my ideal life in a lot of ways, is kind of hang out, travel a bit, hang out with friends, a lot of social time, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then, but yeah, otherwise, a day in the life, it's all over the place. Some days I'm working all day. I try to keep my evenings relatively free. I don't want to necessarily working in the evenings too much anymore these days. Yeah, I mean, self-managing. So the occasional texts and stuff from tenants that I deal with when I have renovations on the go, that definitely takes up a chunk of my life. But even then, it's mostly mental bandwidth more than anything, because I'm not doing any of the work myself. I just need to make sure that I have the right people lined up for the next stage of the project, and that they have their materials that they need and all that stuff. And then just like analyzing my portfolio, see where things are at, see when the next turnover is happening, and just managing that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Even on the renovation aspect, people don't realize just because you outsource it doesn't mean it ends there. You kind of have to
No.
even manage that portfolio, manage that
Yeah.
contractor,
Yeah.
stay updated, right?
And I do act as my own GC for the most part. So that is something where there probably is value in getting a GC to handle that stuff for you. I sort of still enjoy that process. It's half stress, half enjoyment. I like to lay out the unit the way I like and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. You can decide what parts of things you enjoy, and if there's parts you don't enjoy, those are good things to outsource.
Yeah. So what does the next year look like for you, Kellan? Is it primarily you're just going to just focus now on apartment buildings and transition into that, or are you going to continue acquiring, these small multis?
My plan is larger buildings. My plan is to try and avoid the shiny object of 3 to 4 unit buildings. I'm going to try and focus on 6 and up. That's my goal. I mean, if I come across a fantastic deal that's a triplex or fourplex, I'll probably still buy it. But it's going to be my focus is focusing on bigger buildings, and transitioning my business is something that's a little bit easier for me to hire out management and know that it's something I'm going to be able to manage well over the long term. I know a ton of people who say, yeah, I just got a property manager and now they handle everything. I can guarantee you there's a lot of shit happening behind the scenes that they're not saying, right? Because when you just hand things off to a property manager, I've been in a lot of buildings that property management handles, and it's not being handled manager.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. So eventually, like you were saying, it would probably make sense for you to have internal hire
Yes,
someone who could
yes,
then, do exactly what you need. I think that that's probably the best method as you're progressing.
yes.
There's definitely advantages for in-house.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's cool to be able to, like I hire a lot of people, not full-time employees, but a lot of people make their living off of me sending them e-transfers. A lot of
There you go.
people.
For sure.
Yeah, so it's kind of neat to be able to for that to be a result of what we do, right? And I want to treat people well along the way, whether it's tenants, contractors, anyone involved in the process. Yeah, I want to make sure people are being treated well along the way. And that's, you know the perfectionist in me wants to do a lot of this myself, but yeah, but outsourcing is really important. And if you do it, you want to do it right. You want to train people well, and explain the situation, and follow up with them
Yeah,
throughout the process.
for sure, for sure. All right, now we're gonna segue to, I guess, the end of the podcast here. Usually, I
Yeah.
like to ask my guests here is for someone who's looking into growing their portfolio or getting into real estate investing. What are some books that you recommend? Maybe a top three.
So I don't really know any good real estate books, to be honest. They're, for the most part, they're investing books, and books are mostly a mindset thing, I find. I think I haven't read any of them, but the Bigger Pockets books are probably some of the more actionable type stuff on burring and renovating and things like that. But on the real estate side, I don't know that I've really read any great books on that. But like, on the businessy mindset type stuff, I liked Blue Fishing. I liked Never Split the Difference. I love the 4 Hour Work Week. I'm rereading it for the second or third time right now.
Yeah,
Audiobooks, obviously. Yeah, I don't know. There's a ton of good books. I think, like, just, yeah, like, if you don't read books right now, like, I think that if you just like skim through a bunch of titles and things like that, you'll find one that really, like, I want to read that. That sounds super interesting. So
yeah,
if you're not reading books, I definitely recommend just finding one that excites you, and just jumping into it.
absolutely, absolutely. And then if I know we can't travel anywhere, but if you can travel anywhere in the world right now, where would it be and why?
It's a good question. We do plan on going out west and hanging out in Vancouver for a while, and maybe enjoying the process of, like, traveling across Canada. So that is in the works. We are going to the Dominican in November. We booked that in January of 2021. So we booked it really early on, just saying, "Well, hopefully vaccines are all out and we can have this trip." So we're doing
Right.
that. Australia has always been one of the ones on the top of my list. So I absolutely want to go there. That's probably really high up on the list, at least.
Um, and then just leave off with the audience here with one piece of advice. What would that be?
Again, for me, a big thing is focus, right? So, like, whatever your goal is, try and laser focus on it. Try not to have more than one, maybe two main goals, and just avoid all the other distractions. It really helps a lot to say no to a lot of things. That's a big part of my mantra, is just saying no to things. So, yeah, just become laser focused. Put your blinders on. Ignore all the noise. Whether maybe that means you need to unfollow a ton of people on Instagram and Facebook, or only focus on reading books that are specifically on the topic you want to do. Just like surround yourself with people doing exactly what it is you want to do. If you want to do flipping, hang out with a bunch of flippers and talk to flippers. And if you want to do buy and hold, focus on that, right? Like, just find your lane and laser focus on it. You're generally going to become an that's where you're going to get most of your success, is by laser focusing on one thing and becoming an absolute expert at it, and just running that lane.
Exactly, exactly. And then for folks that want to connect with you, Kellan, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
Best way is definitely Instagram. So kellan.james on Instagram. My website is kellanjames.ca. Yeah, those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me. And then we have our podcast as well, the On Fire podcast. Matt McKeever and I host, so you can always check that out as well.
Perfect, perfect. I'll definitely have all those in the show notes. Yeah, so for folks that want to connect with James, please, with Kellan, please go ahead.
Yeah. No,
And
yeah, no worries. It's my middle name, so.
there you go. There you go. I don't know. They had like a ring to it. I have a
I
friend whose
like
name
that.
is James. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my last name is Panicha, but no one ever knows how to spell it or pronounce it. So now it's Kellan James.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kellan. Really appreciate it. I know the audience got a ton of great golden nuggets out of this, and appreciate
well,
your time on this podcast today.
yeah, thanks, Ross. Appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I hope you were able to get some great golden nuggets out of it. The kindest thing that you could do is share this podcast across all social media to help as many people as possible. If you like this podcast or have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or YouTube. I love bouncing ideas, people, and I love talking real estate. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode. Remember, financial freedom is just a few properties away.